here today at the GDG Cloud event at Campus London. We've had 4 amazing, inspiring speakers today talk about open source, machine learning and AI. If you haven't been to an event or a hackathon before, you should definitely attend. It's one of the most inclusive and diverse community events I've been to. Hopefully no one has fallen over and got bored of my talk, but thank you very much. We've been talking to GDG Cloud about having a hackathon because it would be great to get some coding. They do amazing workshops, but I'd love to just have 2 days of hardcore coding. And I want to get to the YouTube space. I'm sure Jason and Florian can get me entrance into that. They apparently know everybody. They are some really cool dudes. And thank you for, I have like 4 cameras on me, and I understand that each camera adds 10 pounds, so it must be like 50 pounds heavier with so many cameras on me. I feel like a movie star. Yeah!
Okay, awesome. Hello everybody, I am Cheryl. I'm Director of Ecosystem at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And I want to talk to you today about navigating cloud native and navigating open source. First, I'm going to talk about Kubernetes and the CNCF and what does an open source foundation actually do. Secondly, I want to look at some numbers around open source. And then thirdly, give you some tips and hints on how to get involved. Previously, I was an engineer at Google. I spent about 5 years writing C++ on Google Maps. I've been in developer relations, I've been a product manager, managing teams. Nowadays, I say that I advocate for and build communities around Kubernetes, cloud native. Also, I'm on Twitter at @oicheryl, and these slides will be on my blog at oicheryl.com as well. Okay, first off, some numbers for you. So Kubernetes, I assume everybody's heard of Kubernetes actually. Has anyone not heard of Kubernetes? Okay, 2 people. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not going to go into what Kubernetes is in detail right now. It's a very fast growing open source infrastructure project. So some numbers just to look at the community. If you look at Google Trends or in WeChat, the blue line is Kubernetes. It's outgrowing all the other competing products, same for WeChat in China. The Kubernetes GitHub repo has 77,000 commits from more than 2,000 contributors. And the Kubernetes Slack channel has 62,000 users on it at the moment. This is what the issue pages of Kubernetes looks like. There's meetups in 48 countries, more than 108,000 members of these meetups. KubeCon, Cloud Native Con, which is the biggest conference around Kubernetes and Cloud Native, has been growing every time that it's been run. So the last one in Seattle was attended by 8,000 people. The one coming up in Barcelona in 3 weeks' time is going to be about 10,000 people. The CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, the mission is to foster and sustain these open source projects. So there's about more than 30 in total, and these are the 6 most mature and most widely used. So Kubernetes was the very first one, that's where it started, but the goal is for these projects to have longevity and not to rely on people doing it in their evenings and weekends for open source. So it's a non-profit, it's part of the Linux Foundation, which hosts Linux, as you might have guessed. And the philosophy of the Linux Foundation is, at the top you have open source projects. These projects, companies use these projects to make products. These products generate revenue for companies, and the companies reinvest some of those profits back into the open source projects. And that's how you get a good feedback loop where open source leads to more open source and leads to more usage and leads to more products. So as a non-profit, CNCF is founded through membership, so companies who join as members. So there's more than 375, so just like lots and lots of logos to just give you an idea of all the companies that are involved across many, many different countries. And also pays for 8 full-time staff, including me. So the Linux Foundation as a whole is about 200 staff. CNCF is 8, plus we share about 20 with the rest of the other foundations, which includes blockchain, AI, automotive Linux, a bunch of other ones, networking. Okay, so that's the CNCF. Let's look at open source generally. Open source is eating the world. Close to 10 years ago now, I think it was Mark Andreessen who said, software is eating the world. Every company will be a software company. And nowadays, we can say open source is eating software. So more and more companies are choosing to get involved with open source because it reduces the time that you spend on infrastructure, which is not a competitive advantage, and it means you can spend more time on the things that are an actual differentiator for your company and your products. 78% of companies use open source, 63% participate in open source. One of the problems with open source is that it's even less representative than tech overall. I've taken here women versus men software engineers, because clearly women in tech is something that I'm a supporter of. If you look at professional software engineers, 23% are women. If you look at developers in open source, that number's 4%. Perhaps you are a woman, but perhaps you're not. But perhaps your English is not your first language, and so you find it harder to engage in projects which are all English-based. Or perhaps the projects are based on in the US, in the West Coast, and all the meetings are 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night, so you can't contribute to them. All of these things are small barriers that can add up. So looking at women, so these numbers are from a GitHub survey from 2017, and what they found is that men and women are just as likely to say, I'm interested in contributing to open source, but women are twice as likely to have a negative encounter, for example, stereotyping or an unfriendly language, less likely to ask for help in a public forum, less likely to receive unsolicited help. All of these things is the reasons that it's lower in open source than in general software engineering. And the impact of this is both personal and universal. So half of contributors said that their open source work helped them get their current roles. If you're not participating in open source, there's a lot of roles out there that you're missing out on that are not open to you. And then this is a picture. In the US, it's called curb cuts. So at the bottom of a pavement, there's usually a dip where you can kind of go into the road and you can come out of the road onto the pavement again. And this was something that disability advocates in the 1960s fought for, so that people in wheelchairs could go up and down and use pavements. Once these were added, they found that actually this makes it better for everybody, because if you have a heavy load and you have a trolley that you need to push, you can go up and down into the pavements. If you are on a bicycle, or if you have a baby in a stroller, you can use these curb cuts. My point about saying this is that if we can make the community more welcoming and more engaging for everybody, we can make everything better for everybody. How you can get involved. So I was very tempted to put a slide here saying, submit a PR to GitHub, you're done. But we all know that's not how open source really works, right? How many people here actually contribute to open source at the moment? Okay, so I think a third maybe. So it's actually pretty good numbers, generally better, I think, more than the average audience. Roughly speaking, there are 4 different ways that you can participate in open source. One of them is as a consumer of open source projects, participating, contributing, and then leading. This slide is not to imply that this is a strict ordering of left to right and that you should go from one step to another. In fact, a healthy community relies on people being at all levels of this. And I'm going to talk now about some of the different ways at these different levels that you see people engaging. So step 1, consuming. You figure out what open source tools are worth using and you start using them. You come to meetups like this one or conferences. Perhaps you file bug reports when you find things you don't like. So that's consuming. As you get more successful with using these open source projects, you want to share what you're doing with other people. So you can come and speak about it, you can run events, you can help other people who are asking questions online and help them figure out how to do stuff. Or you can curate information. For example, you can put together a newsletter about what's happening, start a podcast, reshare stuff on Twitter, and then contributing. So contributing is not all about code. In fact, in many projects, the other things are actually more valued because there's fewer people to do them. So writing documentation, translating documentation, doing user experience research, coding and reviewing other people's code, or improving tooling and testing around it. All of these things are valuable things that you can contribute. And then finally, after a couple of years of sustained efforts towards a project, you could move into leadership. And leadership in open source means helping other people. So helping organize issues for other people, moderating discussions, mentoring people, or formalizing an open source program at your company so that your company can actually contribute back to open source. So what are the challenges here? There's many unspoken rules in open source. Just the etiquette of getting into, of using GitHub or getting into a public mailing list is not obvious. There's a really high barrier to entry for established projects. So if you wanted to start writing something for the Linux kernel, where do you start? It's huge, right? It's been around for a while. Very few of these maintainers are actually independent. 70% of them are employed by companies. And if you remember the Linux Foundation model from before, a big chunk of the way that companies invest profits back into projects is through hiring developers to work on open source projects, which is good because it means these open source developers can have a livelihood and a salary and a pension and healthcare and all these things. But it means that quite often there's an agenda behind what's happening that's not obvious. I'll talk now about how I overcame these challenges, but I'm sure the story will be different for everybody. So step one, find an open source friendly employer. This is a previous startup that I worked at called StorageOS. This guy on the left is my boss, Alex, my previous boss. Before I joined this startup, I had never done anything in open source at all. And he hired me, and I came out and started doing public speaking and going to conferences and meeting people. And as I said, it's not inherently a negative to work. In fact, there's a lot of opportunities where you can work at a company that is supportive of open source and will pay people to work on open source full time. Step two, find what you're good at and specialize. So in my case, I'm known for doing a lot of public speaking, and I also run Cloud Ldn London, which is a meetup group. We usually get between 200 and 300 people every month. So of all of the different ways that I just told you how you can engage as a consumer, participant, contributor, or leader, find something that you want to do and do more with it and become known for doing that thing. Thirdly, find a sponsor. A sponsor is not open source. It's applicable to work, not just open source. But by sponsor, I mean find someone who is on the inside who can tell you the rules and give you the opportunities that you cannot get otherwise. So this guy, his name is Chris. He is the COO of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And when I left that startup, I just messaged him and said, Chris, I'm looking for something new. Is there anything at the CNCF that is interesting and that you think I would be a good fit for? And he said, yes, there's this director of ecosystem role, and this is what you should do. And that's how I ended up joining the CNCF. But this was not a job role that was posted anywhere. And it was only because I kind of knew him a little bit already that I felt able to reach out and just say, I want to do this. Sponsors are not something that comes across easily. You have to meet a lot of people, talk to a lot of people, and find those opportunities. But sponsors will get you much further than you can get by yourself. Summary of what we talked about. We went very quickly because I know this was only a 20-minute slot. The impact of open source is both personal and universal. So I love working in open source. I really, really enjoy it. I really hope to stay working in open source as long as I can. Find what you're good at, specialize in it, become known for it. You don't have to contribute in one way only. And then lastly, find sponsors who can help you figure out the unspoken rules of open source and who can give you the opportunities that you cannot get yourself. A couple of resource links for you. Most of the numbers came from this open source survey, which was run by GitHub in 2017. These links are about how to contribute as an individual or at a company level and how to measure the impact of what you're contributing. And then the third ones are if you want to contribute to the CNCF or if you wanted to join the CNCF as a member, then those links are for you, or just come talk to me. So this Wednesday is the next one in 2 days' time. So Microsoft, Minimize, Forge Rock are coming to speak. But yeah, we run the first Wednesday of every month, and if you're interested in Kubernetes or cloud, then definitely come and check it out. Okay, so maybe have 1 minute for questions. Does anybody want to ask anything? Hi.
Yeah, hi. There's been an article circulating that says that open source is being threatened by cloud providers. In particular, it talked about how Amazon was the culprit this time. It takes Elastic and, for instance, Elasticsearch and provides its own version as an add-on, and that provides a disincentive financially for companies to make money from open source projects. What are your thoughts on that? Is open source, can it be at odds in certain cases with cloud providers?
I don't know if cloud providers, it's specific to cloud providers. Like some companies will take open source projects and use them and not contribute back. I think that's a bit inevitable. One of the purposes of having a foundation is that these projects are hosted somewhere neutral. I mean, every cloud provider has its own Kubernetes distribution now, but it's not competing with the CNCF because the CNCF doesn't sell any distributions. And similarly, the foundation is, one of the goals is to get these companies to play well together, to collaborate and to contribute back. I don't think it threatens open source as a whole. I mean, Linux is a very successful open source project that's been around forever.
Do you think, is there a scenario where you can have a company behind an open source project, or are you advocating for no companies actually making money out of open source?
Definitely companies can make money out of open source. That's the projects, profits thing. I think it's extremely hard for companies to have the model where you have an open source project and then try and make money as a freemium, add-on thing. I'm not sure there's any companies that have done it really well so far.
I'm Jensen, and I'm curious that I'm very interested to see that you use the WeChat index to mention the Kubernetes, how Kubernetes is discussed in Chinese social media. And I'm curious, where is this source from? How do you get the index?
That I don't know personally.
Okay.
I pulled these slides from the official numbers, but for sure, like Baidu, Tencent, GDG, these are all big supporters of Kubernetes. Cool. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.